Hey everyone. So Steve Mnuchin is the current Treasury Secretary. He was appointed by Donald Trump. He's also the former Chief Information Officer at Goldman Sachs. I believe he also owns a couple hedge funds, or at least he used to. This is a very wealthy guy. And so here he is discussing the. So in the first round of stimulus passed by Congress, there was some increase to unemployment benefits that was passed. And basically, the way that unemployment usually works is it's a percentage of what you were receiving at the job that you were fired or let go from. But because Congress knew that a bunch of people were going to be being let go, they decided to add $600 on top of the benefits that people would normally be receiving. And this may alarm some of you, but that did mean that some people were receiving slightly more than they were before getting let go. And for people like Steve Mnuchin, this really rubs them the wrong way because he's worried that they won't want to go back to work because they are living so high and mighty off of unemployment that why would they ever want to go back to work? And so here he is kind of discussing that, and then we'll kind of come back and talk about it.
You do think it is a disincentive to find a job if you have that extra $600?
There's no question in certain cases where we're paying people more to work, stay home than to work, that's created issues in the entire economy. But let me just say, you have to
I want to interrupt you there for just 1 second. It's not all the evidence. A Yale study from this month refutes that, saying many economists who have studied the benefits said that so far they don't see any evidence in labor market data that the payments are affecting the rate at which people are returning to work during the pandemic.
Well, let me just say I went to Yale. I agree on
that.
certain things. I don't always agree. There's a Chicago study that goes through all the people that are overpaid. But let's just face it. We know factually, okay, there are cases where people are overpaid. There are cases where people are underpaid. The issue is we need to come up with an agreement to extend this. We need to get kids into school. And we're going to work every day until we reach a reasonable agreement that's good for the American public.
All right, and so first off, I mean, he couldn't resist it. He couldn't resist saying that he went to Yale. And honestly, if I went to Yale, I'd probably want to bring it up all the time too. But then once I found out he went to Yale, I had to look it up. He was a member of Skull and Bones. For those of you who don't know, Skull and Bones is the secret society at Yale. And why it's interesting is a bunch of really powerful people were members of Skull and Bones. Both George Bush's, John Kerry, a number of other people, and apparently Steve Mnuchin. And definitely something worth looking into if you're even semi interested in conspiracy theories. That's not really my thing, but I've always found it a little interesting. Regardless though, so he kind of uses that as a way to kind of disprove the Yale study, despite the fact that that doesn't disprove the Yale study. And he brings up the Chicago study. And so I went and I tried to find it. Obviously, I didn't know the exact study he was looking for, but I'm 99% sure that I found it. I will link it in the description as well as the Yale study. But what the Chicago study basically did, first of all, it was very ambiguous as to whether or not it felt that there will be a substantial amount of people that wouldn't want to re-enter the labor force if they were receiving increased unemployment benefits. And it honestly made the case that even if that was a thing that happened, there were trade-offs where it would still be benefit. Even if that was a significant thing, there would be trade-offs. That's what the Chicago study said. But that's his example. But then if you look at the Yale study, so the economists in that study said that there was virtually no difference between the people who were receiving more in unemployment than they were receiving from their job and people who were receiving less in unemployment than they were receiving from their job when it came to re-entering the labor market. And they actually found that in some instances within some sectors, the people that were receiving more actually were re-entering faster and at higher rates. And I mean, you can probably guess, because the people that were receiving more, these are people who do not make very much money. And it's one of these things where it's not just a singular thing. There is more to it. When you're unemployed for a certain amount of time, it makes it really hard to find a job. Employers are less likely to hire you if you've been unemployed for a certain amount of time. So these people who aren't making very much money, they might be getting unemployment, but they know that if this probably will end someday. It ended August 1st actually, and they're discussing whether or not to continue it. That's the whole debate right now. But they know that hey, I got to get a job because this isn't going to last forever. And you also, it's really hard to move up, and because that's the thing, that's this common argument against welfare and unemployment, is that people will be stagnant and lazy. And I'm sorry, that just completely goes against human nature. Humans are not generally, I mean, of course there are going to be some exceptions, but humans generally are not content with the bare minimum. People always want more. That's kind of part, that's what capitalism is built on, the idea that people are greedy. And so this idea that if people are getting this unemployment benefits, they'll never want to improve ever. And that's just, I mean, it's just not borne out in the data at all. And also just something I just find it so hilarious, this idea that, I mean, like I said, Steve Mnuchin, very wealthy guy. The idea that he's saying that the poorest people in this country, well, maybe not the poorest people, but some of the lowest paid people in this country, that he's calling them overpaid. That he has the audacity to call them overpaid. And, looked it up. His dad also went to Yale. His dad also worked at Goldman Sachs. Is it a coincidence that Steve Mnuchin, and actually, also interesting, his grandpa was a diamond dealer. So he doesn't exactly come from the most humble beginnings. So is it a coincidence that his dad also went to Yale, also went to Goldman Sachs? Would he have been able to go if he had been, started off with a dad that was making these low wages that are, getting more off of unemployment? Who knows? Steve Mnuchin would probably tell you that he would. But regardless, I just, the idea that you would call those people overpaid, I just find ridiculous. That's absurd. These are people who would receive a raise. Like, if we made the minimum wage a living wage, these are people who would receive a substantial raise. And so these are not people that are like making lots of money. And it's very difficult to improve your circumstances if you're in that position, because it's harder to save. There's cost of living increases. There's all sorts of things. And given the fact that we're in a pandemic, I mean, it's absurd. And the idea. Oh, also, I couldn't believe I almost forgot the last angle of this. So the other element of the stimulus package that was passed is that there was $500 billion given to the Treasury Department that could be given out through corporate bailouts. But the interesting thing was that that money could be leveraged into multiple $1 trillion to be given out, like I said, in corporate bailouts and with very little strings attached. I mean, think back to the Wall Street bailouts. Steve Mnuchin put in charge of that. He had no problem with that. He had no problem with little to no strings attached corporate bailouts, but people making 600 extra bucks, that really rubbed them the wrong way. Anyway, and, talk about a moral hazard. I mean, my gosh, there's no strings attached bailouts for corporations. That's the true moral hazard, not people receiving unemployment benefits. Regardless, I thought this was interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed this clip. If you disagreed with anything I said, please leave a comment down below. But if you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.